Damon Hale had lived on the frontier moon of Artis 9 for almost 2 years, and during that time he had learned that silence could be both a friend and a warning. The moon was mostly desert, covered with rocky hills, wide canyons, and endless stretches of dry plains. Humans had built only a few small stations there, mostly for research and communication towers that needed constant repair. Damon was one of the engineers responsible for keeping those towers working. It was a lonely job, but he liked the peace in the open sky. Every morning he woke up, checked the atmospheric shields around his outpost, packed his toolkit, and drove across the desert in his rover. Most days were the same, quiet and uneventful. But this day was different from the first moment he stepped outside. The sky looked normal, clear and pale blue, but the air carried a strange vibration. Damon felt it before he heard anything. His handheld scanner beeped softly, showing a faint but unusual energy spike coming from far across the canyon region. That area was normally empty, with no stations or machinery. Nothing should have been giving off energy there. Damon frowned, tapped the screen, and checked again. The signal was real. Weak, but real. He climbed into his rover, started the engine, and turned toward the direction of the reading. Probably a fallen satellite, he said to himself, or a broken probe. Something inside him was uneasy. The signal rhythm didn't match any human device he knew. It pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat. The rover bounced over rocky ground as Damon drove deeper into the canyon. Wind blew dust across the narrow path, and the walls of the canyon rose high above him, creating long shadows. After 15 minutes, the strange signal grew stronger. Damon slowed down and scanned the area again. The reading was now clear, not human technology. Something foreign. Something damaged. He followed the signal until the path opened suddenly, revealing a small clearing hidden between the canyon walls. His eyes widened when he saw a metallic object half buried in the sand. It was shaped like a broken pod, burned on one side and cracked open at the top. Smoke curled from its edges, and the ground around it was still warm, suggesting it had crashed only recently. Damon parked his rover carefully and approached the pod with slow, cautious steps. He called out loudly, "Is anyone here? Does anyone need help?" His voice echoed off the canyon walls. There was no answer. Only the faint crackling sound of burned metal cooling. He examined the pod, noticing symbols on its side curved lines and glowing marks that were unlike any human language. It was definitely alien. Damon's heart pounded, but he kept calm. He had trained for emergencies, though he had never expected this. He leaned closer, shining his flashlight through the cracked opening. That was when he saw her, inside the pod. Curled up near the corner was a young alien girl, looking no older than 19 in human years. Her skin had a soft silver tone, and her hair was dark and tangled. She wore only torn, burned fabric, whatever was left from the emergency coverings inside the escape pod. Her body was shaking slightly, as though she had been fighting the cold and fear for a long time. She looked weak, exhausted, and too frightened to move. When Damon's light touched her face, her eyes opened slowly. Wide with shock and confusion, Damon froze, not wanting to scare her more. He raised both his hands in a peaceful gesture and spoke in a gentle voice. "It's okay. I'm human. I won't hurt you." She didn't understand his words. He could tell by her expression, but she could feel the calm tone. Her breathing softened a little, but she still looked ready to flinch at any sudden movement. Damon carefully removed his jacket and placed it on the edge of the pod where she could see it. Then he pointed at the jacket and then at himself, trying to show that it was safe. After a long moment, she reached out weakly and touched the fabric. Her fingers trembled. Damon finally leaned closer and offered her a bottle of water. She stared at it before taking it slowly, her hands shaking so much that Damon had to steady the bottle for her. She drank small sips, as if afraid the water would disappear. After a few seconds, she whispered something in her own language. The words were soft, almost broken, and Damon wished he could understand. But her tone told him everything he needed to know. She was scared, alone, and desperate. Damon spoke again, slowly and calmly. "I'm here to help. You're safe now." She didn't understand the words, but she watched his face carefully. Humans could be strange to aliens, but kindness was something every species recognized. He reached out his hand and waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't pull her. He simply waited. She hesitated, her eyes full of fear and uncertainty. But finally, with a small breath, she placed her fragile hand into his. Damon held it lightly, helping her sit up. She winced in pain, clearly injured from the crash, but she held on to his arm, as if it was the only solid thing she had left in the world. He slowly guided her out of the damaged pod, supporting her weight. She was very light, almost weightless, which told Damon her species probably came from a low-gravity world. When she stood on the sand, she looked around the canyon with wide, confused eyes, as if she was trying to understand where she was. Damon wrapped the jacket around her shoulders and pulled it gently closed. She held it tightly with both hands, grateful for the warmth and the safety it gave her. The wind blew dust across the clearing, and she shivered again, pressing closer to Damon for support. He helped her toward the rover. But before they could take more than a few steps, his scanner beeped loudly. Damon quickly glanced at it, and his stomach tightened. A second signal was approaching the canyon. It was fast, mechanical, and not human. Damon whispered under his breath, "That can't be good." The girl noticed his sudden worry and looked up at him, her eyes asking silent questions. Damon forced himself to stay calm for her sake. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. "We need to leave," he said softly, even though she couldn't understand. He pointed toward the rover and then toward the sky, hoping she would grasp the idea. She nodded slowly, trusting him. He helped her climb into the rover, making sure she was secure and covered with his spare blanket. The approaching signal grew stronger. Damon started the engine, and the rover hummed to life. As he turned it around toward the canyon exit, he caught a glimpse of shadows moving across the sky's sleek shapes with dark armor and glowing engines. They were searching for something, and Damon knew exactly what that something was. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The rover sped across the rocky ground, bouncing and shaking, but Damon kept it steady. The alien girl held onto the seat, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't scream. She trusted Damon, even though she had known him for only minutes. That trust made Damon even more determined to protect her. Behind them, one of the flying machines descended into the clearing where the pod had crashed. Damon saw it only for a moment through the rear mirror, but that was enough. The ship's markings were sharp and aggressive. Not peaceful, not friendly. Raiders, he thought immediately. Alien raiders known for capturing survivors and selling them to the highest bidder. He had heard stories about them, but never imagined he would see one so close. The girl noticed the shadow of the machines in the mirror and gasped softly. She grabbed Damon's sleeve with trembling fingers, her eyes silently asking if they would be caught. Damon shook his head and gave her a small, determined smile, trying to show her that he would not let anything happen to her. Driven by that promise, he guided the rover through narrow paths, hiding behind tall rocks and using the canyon's twists to avoid detection. Several times the machines flew overhead, scanning the ground, but Damon kept moving, never stopping for more than a second. It took nearly an hour to escape the canyon region. When they finally reached open ground, Damon slowed the rover down and exhaled deeply. The girl also relaxed a little, though she still looked around nervously. Damon pointed to himself and said, "Damon." Then he pointed to her with a gentle smile. "You." She blinked, touched her chest softly, and whispered a name that sounded like Liari. Her voice was soft, tired, but full of life. Damon repeated her name slowly to show he understood. Liari managed a tiny smile, for the first time since he found her. She didn't look afraid. Damon drove toward his small outpost, knowing that this was only the beginning. He had found Liari by chance, but now that the raiders were searching for her, he understood something clearly: her life was in danger, and he was the only one who could protect her, and he would do it no matter what came next. Damon reached his outpost just as the twin suns of Artis 9 were beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and deep purple. The small shelter stood alone on a rocky hill, built from strong metal panels and supported by a simple energy shield. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, warm, and familiar to him. As he stopped the rover, he looked over at Liari, who had fallen half asleep under the blanket. Her breathing was slow, but every now and then she flinched, as if remembering the fear of the crash and the raiders chasing them. He touched her shoulder gently. "We're here," he said in a soft voice. She blinked awake, her silver eyes trying to make sense of the place. Damon stepped out first, then helped her climb down slowly. She held tight to his arm, carefully, placing her feet on the ground as if she wasn't sure the planet was stable beneath her. He guided her inside the outpost. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and Liari looked around with wide eyes. The place was small but clean. A single bed on the left, a work desk covered with tools, a tiny kitchen unit, and shelves filled with equipment. Warm lights glowed softly from the ceiling. After the cold and empty pod she had crashed in, this place must have felt like another world. Damon pointed to the bed and showed her that she could sit. She hesitated, unsure if she was allowed, but when he nodded reassuringly, she slowly settled onto it. The blanket wrapped around her made her look even smaller, more fragile. He brought her a cup of warm water, something easier for her body after the shock. She accepted it with both hands, sipping carefully. Damon sat across from her, trying to think of how to ask questions she might understand. He picked up his small universal translator, basic device that could translate only common languages. He already knew it wouldn't understand her species completely. Maybe it could help. He pointed at the device, then at himself and said, "Human." Damon. Then he pointed at her and waited. Liari seemed to understand. She touched her chest lightly and repeated her name. Liari, more clearly this time. The translator beeped softly, catching the sound but failing to label it. Damon shrugged with a calm smile. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." Liari watched every move he made, as if she was trying to learn his intentions from his expressions and gestures. When he moved toward his storage cabinet, she tensed for a moment, her shoulders lifting in fear. Damon immediately lifted both hands in a peaceful gesture. "It's all right. I'm just getting medical supplies." She relaxed, but still watched carefully. Damon slowly took out a small first aid kit, then sat beside her. He pointed to her scratched arm, then opened the kit so she could see inside. Liari nodded, allowing him to help. Her trust, even if small, was a huge step. Damon gently cleaned the small cuts and burns she had gotten during the crash. She winced only once, but otherwise stayed still, watching his face the whole time. When he finished, she whispered something soft in her own language, maybe a thank you. Damon didn't understand the words, but he could feel the meaning. He smiled back. After a few minutes, Liari looked around the room again, her eyes landing on the stars visible through the window. The desert night was dark, but the sky was filled with shining points of light. She stood slowly and walked toward the window, touching the glass with one hand. Her face softened, almost sad, as if she recognized some of those stars, or missed someone from them. Damon understood that look. Lost didn't need a translator. He moved closer and stood beside her, keeping a respectful distance. We pointed to the sky and said softly, "Home." Liari looked at him, then at the stars, and nodded with a small, broken expression. Damon nodded back, letting her know he understood, even if only a little. After a moment, Liari pointed upward again and spoke several words in her language. The translator captured some sounds and processed them, but only produced a single result: danger. Damon felt a chill run through him. He repeated the translator aloud. "Danger? From who?" Liari pressed her hands together, then separated them, sharply a gesture of attack or destruction. Then she pointed to the direction they had come from, the canyon where Damon found her. She repeated a word that sounded like Rilok. The translator gave no translation, but Damon had heard stories about a group similar to that. He sat down slowly. "So it was raiders," he murmured. Liari watched his reaction, trying to understand. Whether he was afraid, confused, or preparing for something. Damon took the translator again and pointed to himself. "Damon." He then pointed to her. "Liari." Then he crossed his arms like a shield. "Safe." Shay stared at him for a long second, her eyes wide, searching. She understood the gesture. Damon was promising her safety. Her lips trembled a little, and she lowered her head, overwhelmed. She had nothing left, no supplies, no family, no place to go. And yet here this human was, giving her warmth, food, and protection, she whispered. Something soft and hopeful, and the translator struggled, but caught one word: help. I will, Damon answered softly. He stepped over to his desk and activated the communication panel. He needed to inform the human outpost about the crash and the raider presence. But when he tried to send a message, an error beeped loudly. Signal interference detected. He tried again. Same result. He checked the scanner. A jamming field was active. Damon cursed under his breath. They're blocking all communication. Liari tilted her head, sensing his worry. Damon pointed to the scanner, then drew a small circle in the air, showing something surrounding them. She stared at the screen, recognizing the pattern. She then raised 3 fingers. Damon didn't know what that meant, but she kept repeating it. 3? 3 ships? Damon asked. Liari nodded quickly. Damon ran his hand through his hair. Great 3 raider ships searching the area. He paced the floor, thinking. The outpost offered protection, but not enough to stop raiders if they found this place. He checked the shield strength good, but not strong enough for extended battle. He needed a plan. He looked back at Liari. She sat quietly on the bed, hugging the blanket, watching him with uncertain eyes. She wasn't just frightened, she was waiting for him to decide what would happen next. That responsibility settled heavily on Damon's shoulders. But he didn't run away from it. Instead, he took a deep breath and sat beside her again. He pointed to himself and said firmly, "Protect." Then he pointed to her, repeating the same gesture. "Protect Liari." She understood completely. Her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes softened with relief. Damon stood again and went to prepare the shelter, locking the doors, activating extra sensors, checking the rover, making sure they had enough food and water. Liari watched him move, fascinated by how humans prepared and defended themselves. Damon was only one person, yet he behaved like someone ready to stand against a whole army if necessary. She admired that courage silently. Hours passed, night grew thicker, colder, the desert winds beat against the shelter walls, but inside, the warmth made the small room feel like a safe haven. Damon finally sat down, exhausted but alert. Liari lay on the bed, still wrapped in the blanket. She wasn't asleep, just resting. Every now and then, she looked at him, as if checking to make sure he was still there. When he noticed, he gave her a reassuring smile. "It's all right, I'm not going anywhere." At those words, something inside her finally relaxed. She closed her eyes. Not fully asleep, but resting more peacefully than she had since the crash. Damon quietly stood, placed another blanket near her in case she needed it, and then checked the sensors again. The scanners detected faint movement far away in the desert. The raiders were still searching. Damon looked back at Liari, sleeping lightly on his bed, trusting him completely. He whispered to himself, "They're not taking her." And he meant it with every part of his heart. Damon barely slept that night. He sat near the window, watching the scanners and listening for any strange sound outside. The desert was usually quiet at night, but the presence of raider ships made everything feel more dangerous. Liari slept lightly on his bed, her breathing slow but nervous. Every time the wind rattled the metal walls, she twitched, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Damon felt a protective worry rise in him each time she moved, as the first light of morning touched the sky. Damon stretched his tired muscles, stood up, and checked the scanners again. The jamming signal was still strong, blocking all communication. But something else appeared on the screen, a faint movement in the desert, several kilometers away. Human eyes couldn't see that far, but Damon knew what it meant. The raiders were still searching, moving slowly but steadily. He glanced at Liari. She was awake now, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed. Her hair fell over her face, and she pushed it aside gently. Her eyes met Damon's, and though she didn't speak his language, she could read the worry in his expression. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the empty land. The desert stretched endlessly, but its silence felt heavy with danger. Damon turned to her. We can't stay here long, he said softly, making slow hand gestures to help her understand. Liari watched his hands carefully, then nodded. She knew the raiders wouldn't stop searching. Damon walked to the storage area and pulled out basic supplies food packs. 2 water containers, a small toolkit, and a portable shield generator. He placed everything near the rover. Liari watched him with growing understanding. She wrapped Damon's jacket around herself tighter and stepped closer. Damon pointed at the supplies, then at the rover, trying to show they needed to move. Liari nodded again, but this time she touched his arm softly as if asking something. Damon paused, unsure what she wanted. She pointed to the sky, then made a shaking gesture, like an explosion. Damon understood she was asking if the raiders would destroy the outpost. He shook his head. They won't, if we leave now. He hoped his calm tone would reassure her. Liari took a deep breath and helped gather the supplies. Damon noticed how carefully she handled things, as if she didn't want to break anything. Even in her fear, she moved gently, respectfully. She had a quiet strength that Damon admired. Once the rover was ready, Damon checked the perimeter one last time. The sensors picked up movement much closer now. His heart tightened. They're coming. Liari's eyes widened. She climbed into the rover quickly, and Damon jumped in after her, sealing the door. The engine hummed to life. Damon guided the rover away from the outpost, heading toward an old mining station in the northern mountains, a place long abandoned, but filled with equipment Damon might use to protect them as they drove across the desert. The sun rose higher, warming the land. Dust swirled around the tires. Liari held on to the seat, looking out in every direction. Whenever she saw a shadow in the sky, her body stiffened. Damon kept his eyes on the path and tried to calm her. It's all right, he said softly, even though he wasn't sure. Just trust me. Liari understood his tone, even if she didn't understand the words. She slowly relaxed and looked at him with a small, grateful expression. After about an hour, the rover reached a narrow valley leading toward the old mining station. The entrance was hidden between 2 tall cliffs, perfect for staying out of sight. Damon steered the rover inside and parked under a natural stone bridge that shielded them from above. They stepped out, and Liari looked around curiously. The air here was cooler, and the sound of distant winds echoed through the rocky walls. Damon led her toward the mining station built into the cliff. The metal doors were old and rusty, but still intact. He entered a code on the panel, and the door opened slowly with a deep groan. Inside, the lights flickered but eventually turned on. Dust covered the floor, and old machines stood in rows like silent giants. Liari stepped inside carefully, amazed by the tall structures and abandoned equipment. Damon pointed around, explaining through gestures that humans used to work here. She listened with interest. Touching the smooth metal walls gently, Damon guided her to a small control room inside the station. He activated the power, and the old screens flickered to life. The station's internal sensors were still functional. That was good. He checked the outside cameras and saw movement in the desert. The raiders were getting closer. Liari stood behind him, watching the screens with fear growing in her eyes. Damon looked back at her and offered a gentle smile. It's okay. This place is safer. She nodded slowly, but her hands were trembling. Damon turned the screens off to save power, then walked to the corner of the room and pulled out old mining shields, large metal barriers once used to protect workers from falling rocks. With some adjustments, he could use them as a defensive wall. Liari watched as Damon worked. He lifted heavy equipment, connected wires, hammered loose pieces into place, and tested the shield generator. She was amazed by how humans could build and fix things so quickly. His focus and determination impressed her. She wanted to help, even if she didn't know how, so she stepped beside him, gently touched a panel he was adjusting, and looked at him with a question in her eyes. Damon understood and gave her a small Tula scanner that measured energy levels. She held it carefully, checking the generator when Damon pointed to it. When the scanner beeped with a correct reading, she gave Damon a proud little smile. "You're doing great," he said softly, even though she didn't know the words. She understood the kindness in his voice. Hours passed as they prepared the station. Damon blocked entrances with shields and set traps using old equipment. Liari helped by scanning the area, sorting tools, and warning Damon when sensors detected movement. Together, they made the abandoned station feel less like a dead place and more like a fortress. Near afternoon, the scanners beeped urgently. Damon rushed to the control room and saw 3 raider crafts heading straight toward the valley. His heart pounded. Liari stood behind him, her hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. Damon turned to her. "We need to hide. And if they come inside, we fight." His voice was calm, but his eyes were serious. Liari swallowed nervously but nodded. She trusted him completely. Damon guided her to a small storage room deeper inside the station. "Stay here until I call you," he said gently. Liari shook her head and placed a hand on his arm, refusing to leave him alone. Damon hesitated. He didn't want her in danger, but he also understood she didn't want to be alone again, not even for a moment. Finally, he allowed her to stay behind him, where she could stay safe while still helping if needed. Moments later, the ground shook as one of the raider crafts landed outside. The doors slammed open, and heavy footsteps echoed through the valley. Damon gripped his tool-turned weapon tightly. Liari stayed behind him, her breathing fast but steady. Then the station doors boomed as something hit them from the outside again. The raiders had found them. Damon stood firm. Liari stayed close. And together, in the quiet, dusty mining station, they prepared for whatever would come next. The mining station shook again as the raiders tried to break inside. Dust fell from the ceiling, and Liari flinched at the loud echo. Damon quickly guided her behind a stack of heavy metal crates, giving her a place to stay hidden while he positioned himself near the door. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He had prepared as much as he could. Now he needed to trust his own plans. Outside, the raiders shouted in a harsh language neither Damon nor Liari understood. Their machines hummed with dangerous energy. Damon peered through a crack in the metal barrier he had set up. He saw shadows moving, large figures wearing dark armor. Scanning the area, Liari crouched behind the crates, her hands pressed together tightly. Her breathing was fast, but she tried her best to stay quiet. She watched Damon from her hiding place, her eyes full of both fear and trust. He met her gaze for a brief moment and nodded softly, telling her without words that he would protect her. The metal door shook again. This time it cracked slightly. Damon gripped the makeshift weapon he had constructed from old mining tools. He swallowed hard and took a deep breath. Human courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting, even when afraid. With a final crash, the door burst open, pieces flying across the floor. Dust clouded the room. Damon shielded his face as 3 raiders stormed inside. They were tall, almost twice his size. With heavy boots and glowing visors that scanned the room for movement, Damon stayed low and hidden behind a metal beam. The raiders began splitting up, inspecting the equipment. One raider stepped close to the shield generator that Damon had set as a trap. Damon reached for the switch. Liari's eyes widened. She knew what he was about to do. The moment the raider leaned closer, Damon hit the switch. A sudden burst of energy shot out from the machine, more powerful than it looked. The raider was thrown back, slamming into the wall with a loud metallic thud. Sparks flew from its armor, and it collapsed, stunned. The second raider turned sharply, spotting Damon for the first time. It raised a weapon, but Damon rolled behind another machine, avoiding the beam by inches. The floor where he had been moments earlier burned from the impact. Liari gasped silently, covering her mouth. The third raider moved toward the crates where Liari hid. Damon noticed it immediately. His heart leaped in panic. He couldn't let them find her. He shouted loudly from across the room, banging a wrench against metal to draw attention. The raider turned toward him, reacting to the noise. Liari stayed perfectly still, her eyes wide but determined. The raider aimed a stunning weapon at Damon. Damon ducked and threw the wrench at the lights above, shattering them. The room went half dark, shadows stretching everywhere. The raiders hesitated, their visors flickering as they tried to adjust. Damon used that moment to move silently across the floor. He reached another trap he had set, an old mining magnet he rigged to create a strong pull when activated. He slammed the switch. Instantly, the magnet roared to life, dragging the raider's weapon from its hands and pulling metal pieces toward the wall. The raider struggled to fight against the pull, giving Damon the chance to rush it from behind and push it over. But the second raider was not stunned long. It regained control and fired a shot that narrowly missed Liari's hiding spot. Damon saw the bright beam hit the metal crate beside her, and his chest tightened. He ran toward her. But the raider stepped into his path. Damon wasn't stronger or faster than the raider, but he was smarter. He dodged another attack and grabbed a long metal pipe from the floor. He struck the raider's leg where the armor joint was weaker. The raider stumbled. Damon hit again, this time at the shoulder. The creature swung its heavy arm, knocking Damon backward. He hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. Liari saw him fall. Instinct pushed her to stand up, even though fear filled her heart. She grabbed the scanner tool Damon had given her earlier, the only thing she had that could help. She pressed the buttons, sending a loud pulse sound into the air. It wasn't a weapon, but it confused the raider for a moment. The creature turned toward the noise, giving Damon the opening he needed, with one last surge of strength. Damon pushed himself up and hit the raider in the exposed joint near its neck. The raider fell with a heavy thud, its visor dimming. Silence finally settled in the station, except for Damon's heavy breathing. Yari ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. She touched his arm gently, checking if he was hurt. Damon smiled weakly. "I'm okay," he whispered. "We did it." Yari didn't understand the words, but she understood his smile. She placed her hand over her heart and lightly touched his shoulder in a gesture of deep gratitude. But it wasn't over yet. Outside, their scanners beeped loudly. More raiders were approaching. Damon went pale. They had no more traps. No more time. He needed help suddenly. A deep rumble shook the air. Liari looked up sharply, her eyes widening not with fear this time, but hope. She whispered something urgently. Pointing to the sky, Damon ran to the window and looked out. A human patrol ship flew over the Valley Silver. Fast and powerful. It belonged to the Frontier Defense Force. They must have detected the earlier signal. Damon sent. Before the jamming field grew too strong, the patrol ship fired a bright warning shot into the sky, causing the raider reinforcements to scatter. The hum of its engines echoed through the canyon as it descended slowly. Damon almost collapsed in relief when the patrol ship landed outside the mining station. Human soldiers stepped out, scanning the area. Damon waved to them, calling for assistance. They rushed inside and quickly secured the unconscious raiders. Liari watched the humans with a mixture of awe and confusion. She had never seen more than one human before. But the soldiers spoke gently to Damon. She felt herself relax. One soldier stepped forward and knelt slightly to look at her. He spoke softly, telling her she was safe. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was enough. She lowered her eyes respectfully. The soldiers transported Damon and Liari back to the main human outpost. Their doctors examined them both. Damon had some bruises and a strained shoulder, but nothing too serious. Liari received warm clothes, food, and medical care for her injuries. For the first time since her crash, she slept without fear. Days passed, and Liari grew stronger. She learned small human words, enough to greet Damon or thank the doctors. The humans, in return, slowly learned bits of her language. She felt safe among them, but she always stayed close to Damon, the one who first gave her protection when she had nothing. One afternoon, officers from the Frontier Defense Force met with Damon. They offered him recognition for saving a civilian of another species. They also offered Liari a place in a peaceful colony, where survivors from her world were beginning to gather. But when the officers explained the options, Liari looked at Damon, her eyes searching for his reaction. Damon smiled gently, ready to support whatever she wanted. Surprisingly, Liari shook her head softly. She touched her heart and then pointed at Damon. She wanted to stay with the humans who saved her, especially the human who risked everything for her. The officers nodded respectfully and approved her decision. Under interspecies protection laws, Damon became her legal guardian until she learned enough about human society to live independently. Liari spent her days learning languages, helping scientists understand the raiders' tactics, and assisting Damon with small tasks in the outpost. She laughed quietly now. She smiled easily. She stood taller. One evening, Damon and Liari walked outside the outpost. The sky above was full of stars. Yari looked at them, no longer with sadness, but with hope. Damon stood beside her, hands in his pockets, feeling the quiet peace around them. Yari pointed to the stars and whispered something soft. Damon didn't know the words, but he understood the meaning. She had found a new home. She wasn't alone anymore, and she had to man someone who believed in helping a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do in the wide universe filled with danger and darkness. Humanity showed its strength not through power, but through compassion, and to Liari, that made humans shine brighter than any star.